We are virtual. There are a lot of people I see coming into Zoom, so that's good. That means a lot of people did get the word, and we're also on YouTube, on the WestfordCAT YouTube feed as well, if you want to watch us that way. So let's kick things off with our consent agenda. Committee, you've seen all the documents relating to the consent agenda in the packet. We do have, there was one that was omitted from the agenda, but it was in your packet, and that was a second one for December. I think that's correct. And Valerie, correct me if I'm getting the wrong one. Yeah, it was this. It was the I forget.
So it's void warrant number 2226BS dated December 23rd, 2021 in the amount of negative $496.08. And that's in the packet under the other December warrant.
And that's one that's rotated in your PDF in the packet.
Yeah.
So that's included in this consent agenda as well. Do I hear a motion to approve this consent agenda?
So moved.
Okay, any discussion or questions? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor of approving tonight's consent agenda, and it'll be a roll call vote. Valerie?
Aye.
Ming Chen?
Aye.
Catherine?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Alicia?
Aye.
Gloria?
Aye.
And aye for me, so that's unanimous. That is passed. Thank you. And we will go into public comment. It's 7:03. We're a couple minutes early, but I imagine we might have some public comment. So hopefully people can filter in, and if they have something they need to ask or say, they can do so in public comment. So for those of you on Zoom, what you want to do is raise your hand in Zoom, and I'll pull people in the order that I see people. And just a reminder, you can comment on anything on the agenda. We won't probably necessarily have a back and forth as far as answering questions, especially if it's something on this meeting agenda. We'll probably hold questions and make sure we address them on the appropriate agenda item. And we're going to limit people to 2 minutes per commenter, just to make sure we have time to get to everybody. Although so far it doesn't look like that's going to be a problem because we don't have any hands raised. Well, I'm going to give you guys another minute.
While anyone's deciding maybe if they have something to say, I just wanted to say thank you to Pat for adding that memo about the Special Education Stabilization Reserve Fund deposit in our consent agenda. After the discussions we've had about that, I really appreciate the paper trail and making that all official.
Yeah, that was great. I do want to give folks another minute just to get in and raise their hand. So apologies for the awkward silence, but that sometimes happens. It's Zoom. Well, I think we're not seeing new attendees filter in, not seeing any hands raised. So I think we can move on to informational updates, and we'll start with superintendent update.
Okay, thank you. We just have a couple of updates. Blanchard informed me today that they're actually organizing a winter coat drive to benefit the Salvation Army. So coats in good condition can be dropped off at Blanchard through next Wednesday, January 19th. So through January 19th, people could help donate to that cause if they wanted to. I unfortunately last week I didn't make it into school. So that was the first week, I believe, since school started that I wasn't able to go and visit a school like I normally do on Wednesdays, and the other days I wasn't able to do it. And so that was sad because I love going into the schools. And so I was doing a number of different things coming back from the break, and we just weren't able to make that happen. So I don't have updates from the schools specifically. I have had a number of people ask me questions about tomorrow, and whether or not we would be considering a cold weather day, and we are not doing that. The only places that I'm aware of that have done it did it also due to staffing concerns as well, and we don't have staffing concerns for tomorrow at this moment in time. And so I know, while it is going to be very cold outside, and the wind chill is supposed to be to bring that feeling down even lower, we're still planning to have school and have students in the building for a full day of school. And that is what I have for the updates so far.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Okay. Oh, Valerie, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry. So just with the snow day, the last day of school is June 17th. Is that correct?
Thank you. Yes, that is, I believe that is correct. I'd have to look at the calendar quickly, but I believe, yes, you did just move it the one day because we've had the one. Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you for that update. And we will go to school committee updates. Valerie.
So I'm also on the Access to Town Meeting Committee, which is charged with trying to increase participation and attendance at Westford's annual and special town meetings. And I'm on a working group that was tasked with creating a survey for residents to fill out, so we can try to find out what is challenging or perhaps impossible about attending town meetings. So that will be rolling out online and in a few hard copy locations like the library, the town clerk's office, and Cameron Senior Center. But keep your eyes peeled for that, and we'll try to include that in this week's billboard message on Wednesday to try to get as much input as we can. Thank you. You're muted, Chris.
You are correct. I am rusty. Okay. So thanks for that. That's exciting to hear. And yeah, I was just saying, everybody take a few minutes when you see that to fill that out so the committee can get your input.
It's short. It's only like 4 or 5 questions. So
easy. We'll look for that. Thanks, Valerie. Other committee updates. Okay. We will move on to the student updates. Either Hannah or Magna, feel free to.
The only big update that I have is that we don't have midterms this year, which I think Mr. Antonelli sent an email out to all parents and posted it online. But we are essentially just continuing with school as normal, which I think is a great idea because we have so much more time to just cover content and focus on learning. And so many students were stressed out about missing whole weeks of school and having to make everything up. So we do have makeup blocks built into this new schedule, and I think it's going to be a good idea.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, Hannah and I immediately were like, this was the biggest thing facing, I guess, the students this past week, is everyone was worried about that. And we had like a flu outbreak right before break, and then like this sort of COVID outbreak right now, or last week at least. And so I think it was just a lot on the students. And so we wanted to talk with Mr. Antonelli about the midterms, but he had already made that decision. So I know it seems like, oh yay, like no midterms, but I think it's like really important for the students, and these kids were like dropping like flies in our classes. So I think that was the biggest thing. And then also on the side, I think WA is like running a blood drive really soon in this next coming week, which is usually pretty successful. So those were really the only 2 updates that we had for you this week.
So that blood drive will be at WA itself, correct?
Yeah.
Is that
yeah.
a student council
thing? No, that's I think that's run by HOSA.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that. We'll keep an eye out for that too. Okay. Thanks for all the updates, everybody.
Chris,
Yes.
Courtney had her hand up and I think she was going to mention something that I forgot to mention.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Courtney, if she can.
And am I even seeing Courtney? Oh yeah,
Well, I don't
there
know
you
what
are.
she
Yeah.
thought I was going to mention, but Pat's trying to get into as a panelist, so I just wanted Chris Sanders to be aware.
I was going to mention that eventually because I was going to.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's not what I thought you were going to mention the tier focus monitoring that's coming up.
I can do that as well. That this week on Thursday and Friday, we'll be having the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education's tiered focus monitoring. Thursday will be a tour from the two team members from the department coming out to take a look at our facilities. And on Friday, they will be conducting some virtual interviews with select staff members.
Thank you for that update. And Pat, my apologies. I'm sorry. I'm so glad that you were able to get in. We would have gotten you in one or the other, but yeah. Thank you, Courtney.
Yeah, we weren't going to start. We weren't going to start with
exactly. Okay, now we're all here. Was that, I see another Westford webinar trying to connect. Was that, Pat, was that you attempting?
I think so.
All right, I think I'm gonna like see if I can just get rid of that. I don't know if I can actually. So just I see it kind of spinning a little bit here, and no, I don't think I can do anything about it. So it is what it is. All right, well, we're glad you're here, that's for sure. And with that, we're gonna go on to the next item of business, which is the Westford polling location consolidation. Hopefully everybody got a chance to look at the memo from Town Clerk Patty Doobie. It is a follow-up to her visit to us on the 20th of December. And so I think a lot of it covers and reiterates that good conversation and all the good work that she's been doing, her office has been doing, her working group has been doing, the Board of Registrars, the conversations that they've been having around polling locations and possible consolidation of polling locations. And so she will be going to the select board with a recommendation, but wanted also, since all of our polling sites right now are in Westford schools, wanted to get school committee input and buy-in on whatever the recommendation may be. And so as laid out in the memo, sort of the bottom line, if you go to the end, is that they're still considering a single location, which would be Westford Academy, or two locations, which would likely be Westford Academy and Stony Brook. But they're, I think, looking for us to give an endorsement, a vote of support of a consolidation, be it to one school or be it to two schools. And so I guess I open it up to the committee for your thoughts. I think we had good discussion at the meeting on the 20th. You've seen this memo. I don't know what other questions or comments the committee has, or if we want to come up with a vote on that. Go ahead, Mington.
I totally appreciate that Patty and then the town clerk actually is sharing the information with the school committee, and then Chris, you are actually part of her working group. But I just don't say this is the purview of the school committee. It's like they already have the permission to use our schools. So I don't know, like it, and then whether like they are going to actually do in one school or two school or whatever, that's between the Board of Registrar and the Select Board. And then I don't know why we need to vote here.
Chris,
Gloria, you had your hand raised also.
Yeah, I understand your concern and comment, Ming Chen. I guess what I would add is we are not the decision-making body. We're not taking a vote as to what they will do. But I think it is appropriate as the school committee to voice our support for a particular solution because school buildings are in use. So I do think it does make sense for us to give them our input, even though respectfully, they are the decision-making body, and will support whatever decision they come to because we want to support elections in Westford. I am personally, I think a one school solution makes the most sense, consolidation to Westford Academy. And then, of course, they do need an emergency backup contingency if there was some problem with the building, and that backup solution might involve our middle schools. So I think whatever backup plan they come up with makes sense, but I think that really does minimize impact on the schools. It gets the elections out of the elementary schools, and I do think that that is advantageous, and it makes sense for us to voice support for that.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think that that is in fact the spirit of the town clerk wanting to come to us is, right, we're not the decision maker, but to get our support, because it does have such an impact on the schools. And I will say, I think a one school polling location has a lot of advantages. I think it fits the needs. I think we can support it. We've seen that, but I'm also in support if Patty, the Board of Registrars, ends up ultimately recommending 2 schools, I would also be in support of that as well. Any other comments? Okay, I guess I would entertain a motion at this point if somebody would like to put one forward in support of the recommendation put forth by the town clerk. Gloria?
Go ahead, Gloria.
Always happy to throw out a motion, and if it's not quite right, somebody tweak it for me. I'd put a motion on the floor in support of the town clerk's recommendation to consolidate polling locations to either one or 2 schools in the Westford Public Schools, and to direct the chair to convey our support for the town clerk's proposal.
Okay.
Second.
Valerie seconded that. Any final discussions on that? Seeing none, I will call for a vote. All in favor, voice roll call vote. Valerie?
Aye.
Ming Chen?
Abstain.
Catherine?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Gloria?
Aye.
Alicia?
Aye.
And I'm an aye as well, so it passes 6-1. And I will in fact convey that to Patty and let her know that the vote was in support of her recommendation. And thank you all for the consideration on that. All right, next item up, we're going to kick it to the policy subcommittee to revisit our 2 policies that we've been looking at for the past few meetings.
Thank you, Chris. Let me just start with, since we're back on remote, if I go all robot, I'm going to count on Gloria or Catherine to jump in and take over. So this time we actually do need to do a waiving of the second reading. I know I did it prematurely last time, better safe than sorry. So this time I will make a motion to waive the second reading of P5327, unanticipated bus route interruptions.
Do I have a second?
Okay.
We're all in there. Was that Catherine with the second?
Whoever.
Okay, I'm giving it to you, Catherine.
Okay.
Okay, so all in favor of waiving the second reading of P5327? Valerie?
Aye.
Ming Chen?
Aye.
Catherine?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Gloria?
Aye.
Alicia?
Aye.
And I'm an aye, so that waiving of the reading passes unanimously. And didn't we miss voice roll call votes? I mean, boy, we got to do this for so long. We haven't gotten to do it in so long. So, all right, go ahead, Alicia.
So there has not been any public comment on this policy itself, so nothing has changed since the last meeting. I think the only outstanding thing I would mention is we want to make sure that it comes back around for handbook time. When it's time to start approving handbooks, we want to make sure that any policy changes, and this is just an overall thing, we want to make sure any policy changes are reflected in the handbooks going forward. So maybe that's something that policy subcommittee can do, sort of flag those things that have been changed as the year has progressed, so that once we get into handbook language season, we are making sure that those things are updated. And then again, just reiterating that parents should be on the lookout for communication from their principals as to how this would be communicated to them. Beyond that, I don't have anything else unless there's anything that anybody else has. I guess not. Then I'll throw out another thanks to the transportation department and to Boss for collaborating with us and providing us with the bulk of this language. That was super helpful, especially since they are the ones who deal with this on a daily basis. So they had the foresight, the insight into how exactly things are happening so that we could just memorialize it on paper. So with that, I will make a motion to accept, hold on, let me get the policy number correct. I will make a motion to adopt policy P5327, unanticipated bus route interruptions.
Second.
Okay, I don't know if Valerie seconded it. I heard sound come from you, Valerie, but I didn't hear the word second. All right, I'm giving it to Gloria. I heard Gloria clearly say second. Oh man. Okay, so it's been moved and seconded. Any last comments before we take a vote? Okay, we are voting to approve P5327, unanticipated bus route interruptions. All in favor, starting with Valerie.
Aye.
Ming Chen.
Aye.
Catherine.
Aye.
Gloria.
Aye.
Alicia.
Aye.
And Sean, you moved to the bottom of my list for some reason, but go ahead.
Yeah, I have some little rascals running in.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. You're back then. That's good. All right. So that approves, passes unanimously. And Alicia, I'll hand it to you for the next one.
Okay, so we will start with a motion to waive the second reading of P6110 graduation requirements.
Second.
All right. So we've got a motion and a second, and this is to, well, first of all, I need discussion on waiving the reading. All right. So we're going to vote on waiving the reading of P6110. Valerie.
Aye.
Ming Chen.
Aye.
Catherine. I got to hear it, Catherine. I got to.
Aye. Sorry, I don't know what's going on.
Gloria.
Aye.
Alicia.
Aye.
Dawn.
Aye.
Okay, we've waived the reading. Go ahead, Alicia.
Okay, so before we get into the substance of this, Valerie, very eagle eye spotted in the policy that was posted to the packet. There appears to be a typo in which we left out that first footnote. So if you scroll to the bottom of the first page, hold on, I might get chunky here because of internet. So the bottom of the first page where it says history and social science, 15 credits, and then it says world history 10 credits, US history 10 credits. There's a number one footnote. That footnote did not make it into the policy that got posted. So prior to us posting this, I will make sure that that footnote gets onto the final version, but we will need to make sure that when we make the motion, we include it. The second thing was that Valerie noted, that doesn't add up. That's 10 credits and 10 credits, it says 15. So Carrie, if we could just get an explanation, there's something in the wording there.
Sure. I didn't hear the last part of that, Alicia, but the fact that, are you saying that the 117.5 doesn't add up to the total amount of credits per year?
Under the history credits. Gloria, you want to explain that?
I know this one.
Okay.
It's that history has 10 credits of world history and 10 credits of US history, 5 of those credits are satisfied in 8th grade. So that's why 15 of those credits are high school credits, but our students are doing 5 of those credits in 8th grade and they get credit for that.
Okay, so that's actually the text of the footnote that's missing mentions the 8th grade credit. So that's probably where that went. So that was a copy paste error. I apologize for that, but I'm glad that we had the opportunity to clarify it.
Alicia, just to be
Beyond
clear, sorry, just one last thing on that. Just to be clear, that missing footnote, that has not changed. So we're not really voting on a change to that. So rest
Correct.
assured, whatever you've seen for the last 6 years, 5 years, however long since we've had that remains the same.
Correct. There's no change to that requirement whatsoever. It's just that it was a copy paste error when it probably happened when we were trying to straighten up that box because it was not quite aligning. So, okay. So the public comment that the policy subcommittee received on this policy has mostly been along the lines of, there were 2 comments, and they were concerns that students were not going to possibly be getting exposure to programming as part of the technology requirement. Part of what the policy subcommittee discussed was this particular requirement was not always being satisfied by a programming course. Very often it was being satisfied by something like a digital music course or a photo editing course. So it wasn't always necessarily that students were sitting down and experiencing, say, C++ or Java or Microsoft Suite or things like that. So when the policy subcommittee discussed this last week, we felt comfortable putting the policy forward as it is currently written, as it is currently drafted. So if anyone else has any comments, feel free to chime in.
Gloria, go ahead.
I would just clarify the other thing we discussed to address the parent concerns about programming. Certainly those programming classes are available at Westford Academy, and for the students who want to take a coding class, they can do so. And those opportunities are absolutely still available. This change in the policy doesn't impact that, and it just provides the flexibility for students who want to use their elective credits in another way, that they now have that additional flexibility.
Thanks for that clarification. Alicia, did you have anything else before you want to call for a vote to adopt?
Nope, I don't think so. I think we're good. So just to be clear, Chris, it would be motion to adopt the policy with the edit of the #1 footnote being put back in there. So someone other than me put that together in a coherent sentence.
Do you need that? Do you need that as a motion, or was that a motion that I second? I'm not sure.
I think that suffices, Alicia.
Okay,
Ditto.
sounds good.
Works for me. All right, let's get a second on that.
I'll
Okay,
second it.
All right, Sean with the second. So it's a motion to adopt P6110 graduation requirements as amended by putting the original footnote #1 back in. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All in favor, Valerie,
Aye.
Ming Chen,
Aye.
Catherine,
Aye.
Gloria,
Aye.
Alicia,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
and I'm an aye, so that passes unanimously. Thank you, Policy Subcommittee, for your diligence in getting all these policies moving along. I'm excited to see which ones are coming next in the near future, I'm sure. Thanks again, and thanks everybody. Okay, we're moving on to our next agenda item, which is our budget presentation. And I believe whoever would like to share the presentation, you should be able to share screen.
All right, I will work on that. Let me see, I want to select. Since I'm using 2 different computers.
Oh my.
Right, because I'm having, let's see what happens if I go here. Aha. So So I want to select that. See if that's, well, we'll get there. We will get there.
Take your time.
So,
We're ahead of schedule.
that's true. So it's saying I need to open my preferences in order to do that.
Oh no.
So maybe, wait, nope, here we go. Allow Zoom, okay. Fascinating.
You want me to share it?
I might need you to, because the firewall might not be letting me share it from my district computer, which will be interesting here. So let's try one more. If I move it. No, it's not going to work. It's not.
Let me ask you, I can share, I've got the PDF from the packet, but I also have the Google Slides one, which I see you're in. Can I share? That's the one I should
Google
share.
Slides, yes, share the Google Slides, because I just added I brought an additional slide in at the end to wrap things up. So if you can share that, and then I can see. So I apologize for that. I thought I'd be
No problem. Yeah, no problem whatsoever.
And now I can't use the fancy laser pointer, but if
Well,
you use the laser pointer and bounce around at any
I think
time.
I might be able to let you actually.
Oh, really?
Already? I'm going to give you mouse and keyboard control. I just did that. I don't know what you can do now, but
oh my gosh,
give it a shot.
well,
I think you can at least click through.
okay. And now I hesitate to do that because I don't want to. I'm controlling your screen. Wow.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Okay. So does that mean that you see my cursor moving around?
I do, yeah.
Okay, that's good. That it won't be the fancy laser, but so all right. So with that delay, thank you for your patience, everybody. The first thing I want to say is that I actually wanted to change the title of this initially, right? The Superintendent's FY23 budget proposal, because this was a collaborative team effort in working on this together. And I, as a new superintendent, was hesitant to say that it's my budget proposal. And then in reviewing our policies, we saw that it's supposed to be the superintendent's budget that is presented. So I was like, oh, well, then we can't change the name. I just really appreciate the teamwork that went into this. Pat and Carrie and Courtney specifically have been phenomenal in helping us through this process. And we'll even talk a little bit more about that process as we get into it. But with that, wait, now it's clicking at me, but it's not letting me move us. So it says that I can control it. Okay, so you controlled it. You moved
it. Says waiting. It says it's waiting for you to control the screen. Was there like an approve, accept that you had to do?
Well, if you can move it and you can still see my cursor, then that still works, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, so this is our outline for the presentation. It is, it's a little bit different than the way we've done in the past. I'm gonna kind of jump right into the numbers quickly and then kind of go backwards to talk about where some of those came from as we go through the presentation. So the first thing will be, we'll talk about the timeline for people to expect moving forward. Then we're gonna talk about the overview in general. Then I'm gonna share what our projected enrollments look like. Then we're going to talk about the adjustments from FY22 that are being reflected in this budget request for FY23. Then we'll talk about the development to remind people how we got here. And then we're going to break it down into the different expense categories, our revenue categories as well. That'll kind of help explain things as we get there. Go ahead. So our first, clearly talking about our budget timeline, you can actually jump to the next slide too. So tonight, this is the presentation. So January 10th is our presentation. And then Chris, thank you. The 18th, we have, we'll continue deliberations. And then that would potentially be when we would have the official public hearing as well too, which is outside of the deliberations and before the potential vote. The next one would be the 31st. And so tentatively, depending on how this evening goes and how the 18th goes, if the school committee feels ready to vote on the 31st, then that's certainly what we could be doing. That could also be amended because the town manager is making her presentation to the select board on February 8th, which will then be followed by the March 10th meeting, which will be the joint meeting with the school committee, finance committee, and the select board. And so what we really think ultimately, the school committee needs to vote the budget before then, right? Before we go into that March 10th meeting, we should have a budget that has been approved by the school committee. So while the initial timeline is to say we present this tonight and then we talk about it on the 18th, we have opportunity for public hearing on the 18th. And then if you feel ready for a vote on the 31st, we could do that. Based on some of the information I share with you tonight, we might adjust that already as we talk about the information that could be forthcoming with the town manager's presentation as well. And then we have moved annual town meeting to June 11th. So typically that is earlier in the spring, but we know that this year's select board has already moved town meeting to the 11th, and that is when at town meeting, the official overall budget is voted on by the town. Go ahead, Chris. Thank you. And so now we'll dive into the overview here. So these are the specific numbers that we're talking about. And what I want to look at first is if we look at FY22, the budget request for FY22 was this $62,988,379. That comes from the town allocation of $62,236,868. And there was a difference of $751,511. Now, later on in this presentation, I'm going to talk more specifically about these FY22 numbers because we talked about them on December 20th as well. And these numbers are slightly different only because the Student Opportunity Act is actually listed in the town allocation here, where on December 20th, it was still being calculated in the difference down here at the bottom. So I'm going to explain that a little bit further and remind people on what was planned to bridge that gap. So our request tonight is $64,187,590. That actual overall request for the school budget is 1.9% over this number right here, right? So this request is an increase of 1.9% over the actual budget request for FY22, which is the town allocation plus this difference. So every single year, the town allocates funds to the schools. And this year, based on an earlier conversation that we had with town manager and the director of finance for the town, we were anticipating a 2% increase from the previous year. So this number in this column here, the $63,481,604 is a 2% increase over this allocation here. So if that remains the same, then we're going to be looking at a difference this year of $705,986. Now, when I shared our initial thoughts about FY23 with the town manager, it was a higher increase. This number was higher, all right? And we have since gone back and looked at it, and we've been able to decrease the number to 705,986. And the town manager believes that they'll be able to increase this somewhat. I just don't know exactly what that number is, but I do know that this number in the bottom is going to shrink. I just don't know by how much yet. So when I know what that number looks like more specifically, then we'll be in a better position to determine, okay, are we ready to vote based on how I talk about making up this difference, or are we, are there more conversations that we have to have? So tonight, I'm going to talk about how we got to this number up here, the $64,187,590. I'm not going to talk about this shortfall and how we're going to bridge this gap yet. That's something that we can talk about more on the 18th after you ask any questions tonight, but it's also going to be dependent on what the town manager is able to provide us for our overall town allocation, which we might not know until closer to February 8th. So we might end up waiting until after February 8th for us to take the final vote on our budget. I'm hoping everybody's following that. If there are any questions at this point, let me pause for a moment, because I think this is really going to be important moving forward in the presentation, that I want to make sure the committee members are following me so far. Chris, can you look to see if anybody has any questions for me?
I am. Anyone with questions at this point? Raise your hand if you do. Okay.
All right, great. Okay, thank you.
I would just like to mention, Chris, that there seems to be some delay in your mouse. So just be cognizant about that in the case you, so you don't rely too heavily on that visual.
Thank you. That's very important.
And I'm not sure it's your mouse. I think they may be seeing my mouse. I was trying to highlight what I thought you were talking about. And so I still think they're not seeing your mouse.
All right, so that's good. So I won't spin so much.
We'll make do.
Still, nobody had questions, so that's good. All right, thank you. All right,
Thanks.
let's go, if we can move forward. Thank you, Chris. So now let's talk about our enrollment, right? So if you can go ahead and move to the next screen. So this is the projected enrollment. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, George Murray came and presented to you his report, talked about the historical information. And what we've done here is we have taken the numbers from 2022 and we've just rolled them over to 2023 with the exception of pre-K and kindergarten, okay? But we've just taken all of those other numbers and we've just rolled them up the grade to where they would be going next year. And when we look at that, we see that there's naturally going to be a change in the number of sections that we're going to need in our pre-K to 5 schools. We've actually been doing this work for a couple of years now, right? So there's been shift and movement in the sections, specifically in the elementary schools when one grade has moved up. Sometimes the teacher or a teacher, if a 3rd grade might have had 5 sections and the previous 4th grade only had 4, so then they need to have that 5th section in 4th grade the following year. It might be a teacher who moves, or they might have reassigned positions within the school. Sometimes they've moved teachers from one school to another in order to make that work. But when you look at this slide, what you can see over in the far right column is the overall FTE change. So if you look at the first one, it shows up in grade 1 at Nabnasset. So next year, we're anticipating that grade 1 would need 1 less section than they do this year, because this year they have 6 sections. Next year, we're projecting that they would only need 5 sections. Now, then when we look at the Miller School, we're looking and we see that grade 2 would be able to decrease by a section based on rolling up the numbers, but grade 1 is potentially going to need an additional section than they had this year. So that wipes each other out, if you will, right? Because a teacher within Miller could simply move from one grade to another in order to support that need. And we move to Robinson and we don't see any change specifically from this year to next year within Robinson School. But then when we look at Abbott, we're going to see a similar scenario that we see at Miller, where the 4th grade would be decreased by a section, but the 5th grade needs to increase by a section. And then we see the same thing at day school with the actual same grades, right? So that the 4th grade would decrease by a section and the 5th grade would increase. But then when you look at Crisafulli, the incoming grade to Crisafulli, we anticipate that they're only going to need 5 sections there. So that's going to be an additional reduction of a section that doesn't have an increase anywhere with it. So that's where we get the net change at the bottom of -2 for overall pre-K to 5 for next year. You can go ahead and move to the next slide, Chris. So when we look at our middle school sections, this gets a little bit more complicated, because I want to remind everybody that our middle schools are set up in teams. And so each team is made up of teachers who are licensed to teach very specific courses, whether it's ELA, science, social studies, or math. Some people are dual certified and they teach 2 subjects. Some people are certified and just teach 1 of those subjects. So at Blanchard, if you look across both years, you'll see the number 8 for sections. They currently have 2 4-person teams in each grade at Blanchard. So you see that the way that the numbers work as we roll them up it remains relatively consistent. When you look at the Stony Brook numbers, the incoming grade 6 drops significantly. And if we were to keep 10 sections in grade 6, then the class sizes would shrink down to 16. And while we're trying to be fiscally responsible and look at our budget moving forward and being purposeful in the way that we absorb the decreasing enrollment, it makes sense that we remove 2 sections at the Stony Brook School and in 6th grade specifically. Now that can mean a lot of different things, because what Stony Brook has, if you look to the left side, what Stony Brook has in all 3 grades are 2 4-person teams and 1 2-person team. So what we'd be looking at is removing one of those 2-person teams that exists at Stony Brook. You can't, because it's a team model, when we're looking at reducing sections in the teamed classes, you can't reduce by 1 section. It has to be an even number. It has to be a 2 or a 4. And so if we reduce by 2 sections, then Stony Brook will be able to reorganize in multiple ways. It could be all 2-person teams. It could be 4 2-person teams in 6th grade. It could be 2 2-person teams and 1 4-person team. It could be 2 4-person teams. So there's a number of ways that can be reflected. And the Stony Brook administration will look at the certifications and the licensure that exists there and look to see what would make the most sense. I will say for a number of years at the middle school, we have talked about the benefit of 2-person teams in 6th grade as a transition from elementary school to middle school as a possible strategy to help with that transition. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we would do that across the board. It doesn't mean we would do it all in one school or across the whole district, but it's definitely something that we can look at. So that's the way that the -2 reflects itself in this projected enrollment. Now, when you look at the bottom section of this slide and you look at the numbers at the academy, we also know that the enrollment at the academy has also been decreasing, and it will continue to decrease. And so we've talked about what does that mean at the academy? Should we be looking at reductions at the academy? And if so, where would we be doing that? So before we get into the next couple of slides, I'd like to ask if anybody has any questions about what I just talked about in the enrollment piece, because that's what we're going to talk about in the adjustments in the next couple of slides. Are there any questions about? Yes, Valerie, go ahead.
I don't know if it's a short answer or a long answer, but can you just speak to how those teams at Stony Brook are configured with regards to PBL?
So currently at Stony Brook, the 2-person team in 6th grade has been the project-based learning team, and in 7th grade it's been the same thing. And so if we have 2 2-person teams in 6th grade and 1 4-person team, then one of those teams would stay intact and remain. It could still continue to do that. If we ended up with 2 4-person teams, and we could be looking at how the project-based learning expands into a 4-person team. If it was all 4, if it was 4 2-person teams, then it could be a combination. One of the things that we know that we've seen even just over the last couple of years is just the increased use of the project-based learning strategies across the teams in general. And so what the difference is right now is that the 2-person teams, both in 6th and 7th grade, are specifically interdisciplinary focused in everything that they're doing, while the project-based learning strategies are used in different content areas and in every single grade level in other places. So it wouldn't be eliminating project-based learning. It might change what it looks like. It might expand what it looks like. It could be a couple of different things, depending on what the structure ended up looking like. Ming Chen.
Yeah, so last meeting, the committee actually authorized the administrators to look into full day kindergarten I say that for FY 22-23, where we look into the sections and we still need half-day kindergarten. Can you actually explain a little bit thinking about that?
I can. So let me just, if you can go back to that slide, Chris. So for the purposes of our FY 23 development, we wanted to compare apples to apples. And so while we do know what the full day K program will look like, that isn't impacting the development of the FY 23 actual budget. So the actual changes here would result in, for full day K, we would need an additional 2 sections. So the net change, if we move forward and if on February 14th, it's voted in that we continue to do that, then the net change would ultimately end up being 0 for elementary. But the important piece here I want everyone to understand is that this -2 is still reflected in our FY 23 budget, because the full day K proposal is budget neutral for FY 23. And I'll explain that when we actually look at the adjustment slides. I think that'll be a little bit more clear when we look at that later. Does that help, Ming Chen?
Yeah, thank you. The other question regarding is the grade 3 of Abbey School. I noticed that the class size is like 109 kids with 7 sections. Can you explain a little bit?
I can. The classrooms at Abbott are just physically smaller than all the other buildings, and so we tend to look at what we can also physically fit in the spaces. And so what has ended up happening at Abbott has been different than at other schools because of just physically what the space requires. And so we've had to have more sections at Abbott and with smaller class sizes than we've needed to have at Chrysophilia and even at Day.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So with that, I want to talk about now the adjustments, right? The adjustments that I'm going to talk about are what we have already removed from what exists in the FY 22 budget, and it is already reflected in the FY 23 budget. So if you remember when we were at the overview slide, I said I'm talking about how we got to that 64 million. So this has nothing to do with the 705,000 difference. This is how we got to that 64 million in the first place. And so what we've looked at, and this is, now you can see the changes here. We've looked at, based on enrollments and based on what we believe that we can support, is looking at reducing staffing at Westford Academy by 4 FTEs. That's coming from different places. So we have a retirement this year that we're looking. The first question when we started looking at our budget, one of the things we talked about was knowing that we had a decreased enrollment, knowing that our enrollment is decreasing, knowing that it's been doing this for a while, and we need to be looking at, again, how can we purposefully support where we're going and still try to have the same resources to support the students that we have. One of the things we talked about as a leadership team, and I talked about with the curriculum coordinators and all the principals, is to start looking at when we have somebody who retires and or somebody who resigns, we really need to start looking at, the first thing is, instead of just assuming that we're automatically going to rehire this position, we should look to see what would it look like if we didn't rehire that position? And are there different ways for us to rethink this? Are there different ways for us to look at how we can provide these courses without an additional person? And so that's what we've done specifically at Westford Academy. We asked the curriculum coordinators and the administration to look at that and say, okay, if we didn't rehire, we have 2 people who are resigning and leaving mid-year, and we're going to need to hire interim people to teach the classes that students are already in the spring. But we won't continue that through if we knew that we could absorb that. So one of those is in the math department, and one of those is in the visual arts department. So those are 2 of the FTEs that we're looking at right away, right? The other one is we looked at the class sizes that we have in our English department, and we have historically been trying to keep those class sizes even lower than what the desired cap of 25-1 was, because of just the amount of writing and feedback that I think English teachers need to do. But we needed to look at it and say we might need to increase those numbers until the numbers at Westford Academy also continue to decrease as they are right now at the middle school and at the elementary as well too. And so we looked at that, and we believe that we can reduce the English department by at least 1 FTE. And then we have a retirement in the social studies department, and we believe that part of that position we can absorb. We need to rehire a partial, less than a 1.0 position, and we believe that we can find that the other part of that reduction in other electives when we look to see what the student requests are as well too. So that's where those 4 positions are potentially going to be coming from at Westford Academy. I've already talked about the 2 FTEs at the elementary school, and I've talked about the 2 FTEs at the middle school. An additional thing that we looked at was the fact that we have had in our budget $13,000 for stipends for MCAS aides to help us with the testing that historically was taking place. And it was quite the task when we were dealing with all the paper and pencil and different turnover of changing out tests to then have things ready for the next day for the students in different areas. And we had hired individuals to help us with that. Now that it's all fully online, the different administrative tasks that exist, we're going to ask our building-based administrators to pick up as well too. So we believe that we can absorb that $13,000 worth of stipends, because the amount of hands-on paper, preparing the extensive number of tests and the turnover of the booklets and the testing materials isn't the same expectation and requirement that it has been in the past. So that's another thing that we had thought about. So overall, we looked and found this $517,000 reductions that is already reflected in our request. Are there any questions there?
Gloria?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all of this information so far and all of the answers so far. My question is regard to the note that is on the slide for the reductions at Westford Academy. I am concerned about the statement that there would be an increase to class sizes in honors and AP level courses. That feels to me, especially if those honors and AP classes are in core subjects, like for example, you mentioned English, that to me sounds like an equity concern. And I don't know that it is equitable to increase class sizes in, for example, an honors English class, but not a CP English class. So that aspect I find a bit confusing and concerning. I would encourage looking at the other suggestion that is here, that is potentially increasing class sizes in electives, or as you've discussed, considering retirements. I know the schedule at Westford Academy becomes very complicated in formulating all of it, but I just had to voice a concern about that one statement.
Sure. I let me explain too a little bit more, because and we can talk about this more in the future as well too. It does purposefully say some, right? Some class sizes, so it's not across the board. But the conversations that we talked about, actually the opposite side of the equity coin is the idea that there are certain things that have not historically been touched, while other things have been looked at. And so one of the things we talked about is that specifically within some of the departments, depending on the courses, the students who are in the honors and/or AP classes are also already more independent. The expectation is that they're more independent in their ability to access these classes. And one of the things we specifically talked about with the AP classes as well is that while we've done a great job of, I think, keeping those class sizes as low as possible. The other piece of it is that they are AP classes that are connected to college expectations, where they're still going to be significantly smaller than their college counterpart, than the college counterpart of those classes as well too. So we are going to continue to look at it. We're going to be mindful of it. But what we're actually talking about is, rather than just saying, oh, we're going to increase the class sizes in the standard level classes, specifically in some content areas, those students might actually need even more direct feedback than I think other classes. And what we didn't want to do is just say we were going to touch some and not others. So I thought that I wanted this to be out there so that people were aware that this is something that could possibly happen. But we are also going to look and see, we don't want to eliminate specific programs, but we might not have as many sections of some electives as well too. So that's the thought process that's gone into that, if that at least adds some clarification to that.
Yes, thank you. That's very helpful.
Sure. Any other questions? Great. So the next thing is, I want to sort of just remind you of it on the next slide, is the two things that we've added as a new request. Is we looked to increase the request budget of 64 million includes us increasing the daily rate of our subs from 80 to 90. Now, we currently are using temporary funds to increase it to 100. And that's something we talked about, that you talked about with us as well, and the school committee talked about. And when we looked at sustaining that, our initial goal was to try to sustain that. Finally, when we looked at what we needed to do and trying to bring down, I think, the budget request as much as possible, what we have included is increasing it halfway. So instead of next year going all the way from 80 to 100, within the budget, we're looking to go from 80 to 90, which is still an increase. And it is more also in line with some of our neighboring competitors as well too. And then the other piece here is that you approved us adding the temporary HR position. And so one of the things we said we were going to do was try to carve that into the budget to see what that looks like. And so that's what this new request is. So it's an additional, it would be making that temporary position that is currently being funded by ESSER 2 funds, it would build that into our budget. And just as a reminder, that came from the outside audit that was done last spring that had been shared with you and we had talked about as well as an internal analysis that we've been going through this year, and just what I've been observing as well, and just the dynamics that we've seen with only having 2 people support our entire employment group. We really need an additional person to help support our entire district there. So that's what the 2 new requests are that are included in that 64 million, and they total $106,070. Are there any questions there? Great. All right, so with that, that's the overview of how we came to the 64 specifically, just with the adjustments. So with what we've already reduced and then what we did add in there. So now I want to talk a little bit more about this development, and some of it's going to be reminding us about the conversations that we had. And just on a fun note, I just want to throw out there that Carrie just does a phenomenal job with presentations and with themes. And sometimes I make fun of her for themes, and sometimes I think she does a great job with this. And she really kind of helped organize the look of this. And I love this picture. And when we all looked at this picture, I was like, it's really great with all of the different gears and that go into it. I also just want to highlight, if you look at the bottom picture specifically, what can happen if you keep your fingers on the gears. That could end up being bad for those people, right? So it's like, so as we're looking at how these pieces fit together, we want to make sure they fit together without keeping our hands on a specific gear, because someone's going to get their fingers hurt there. So we can go ahead and move on. I just wanted to have a little fun there. So just as an overview, this is the information that we shared on the 20th when we talked about the progress. What I've done here is I've updated with very specific numbers, because when I first talked to you on the 20th, the closeout number was the rounded 800,000. But you'll see now that the closeout number, we shared this information also in the subcommittee as well, that our FY21 closeout was $863,128 that was returned to the town. And that surplus was due to the use of COVID relief funds. How we got to that number specifically was also shared with the finance subcommittee. And that's something that we can share with the full committee later as well too. I also want to remind you that we had started talking in October about the full day K presentation because those ESSER 3 funds, we had to submit our proposal at that time. I also want to remind everybody that they're not going to see FDK in this budget process because we specifically talked about it outside of the budget process because it does not impact the FY23 budget. The proposal that we have was neutral for FY23 specifically. But now when you look at the third bullet here, when we talked about the initial analysis, so that first number that I shared with the town manager earlier was actually 3.6% over the FY22 allocation. So it was higher than the 64 million that I'm sharing with you now, because that is currently actually a 3.13% increase that we're talking about right now. And just as a reminder, in that previous meeting on the 20th, so if people are looking at slides from the 20th, comparing it to slides tonight, I wanted to break those numbers down more specifically so we can see where those numbers come from, because I talked about that $889,091. That is the $751,511 plus the $137,580 of the Student Opportunity Act. So tonight in our overview, you saw the number 751,511 as the difference. Whereas before I talked about 889,91 because the Student Opportunity Act was just living in a different column. But if you look at that next bullet, $62,099,287 was actually the very first initial town allocation that was discussed during the development of last year's budget. But eventually that $137,580 was added to that so that that number then increased, which left us with the difference of $751,511. Does that make sense to everybody on the committee in terms of that? Because I just want to be clear so that if anybody says, hey, why was the number different before? Well, it's just because I was trying to compare the presentation and as we had seen it and the numbers we had looked at specifically and remind everybody of that. The last bullet part is just the reminder that $596,511 of the FY22 request was supported with one-time funds. And that's now impacting the FY23 budget. So if you can go to the next slide, Chris, I'm actually going to show everybody that breakdown specifically. So that money is actually this top section here. So the one-time use funds that were planned to close the FY22 difference are these things right here. ESSER 2, the bus contract, the year 3 of that savings. Then there was $13,000 that Courtney Moran was able to use a different grant for special education professional development. So we were able to save that one time there. And then they identified the difference being they would use school choice, $148,586 of school choice money there. So that adds up to that 596,511. That's where those one-time use funds came. And so for the committee to remember, and if anybody's still with us and paying attention in cyberspace, then what we originally talked about last year, the original budget proposal, there was a shortfall of $400-something thousand, but the initial proposal included a savings of $400-something thousand by going with the 4-tier busing. So this number is what ended up happening when the 4-tier busing was taken off the table. That the final shortfall was this top bullet and this bottom bullet added together, which actually adds up to $889,091. So you'll see on the below section, I'm pointing it at my screen like you can see what I'm pointing at, but yeah, I think you're following me. If you look at the below section, the recurring funds planned to close FY22 difference, that first SOA is the Student Opportunity Act. So we knew that that $137,580 was going to be available to us. So it adds up to that difference. It just actually comes through the town allocation because that's the way that it comes to us, right? So it eventually got added to the town allocation. So when we look at the number that was actually approved at town meeting, the number included the initial allocation plus the SOA. So everybody's following that. Do those two things make sense to everybody? If so, we can go ahead, Gloria.
Yes, that absolutely makes sense. I appreciate this slide. I think it very much helps clarify it. My question is actually on the Student Opportunity Act for FY23. Do we have an expectation of what that might be? And is that factored in anywhere at this time?
So we are factoring that will be in the town allocation. So that's the other apples to apples piece that I talked about earlier, right? That is an excellent question. I don't know, Pat, if we know exactly what that is, if we know what that is anticipated or not. Pat, if you're able to chime in, I know we have more slides to look at, but I don't think the specific SOA number shows up.
Well, because we're basing the 2% growth on the upgraded amount. So if you remember, the initial amount was 62,099,099, but with the SOA, it was 62,236,000. And we're growing the 2% on the 62,236. So we're inherently assuming that it's all become part of the base.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Chris, if we can go to the next slide, I'm just going to kind of remind people again, just the process, right? So again, we've gone through, and I talked about this again on the 20th. We've been talking about this for a long time, which is, I have to keep reminding myself that there are people who are listening for the first time, right? But because we've actually talked about it with the subcommittee for a little while, we've been trying to give updates. Like I gave an initial update to the whole committee on the 20th. There might be some people who are just now listening for the first time, so I have to remember that. But we did do a very methodical line by line comparison of the actuals and the historicals, and we did reduce things through that. That was something that that we did. Pat, Carrie, Courtney, and I did for a number of weeks together. We also did that looking with some of our different budget managers and talking with Paul Fox specifically about facilities as well too. We've been looking clearly at our enrollment numbers, so you see the way that that's the way that we've looked at that. One of the things that I've really enjoyed is that we've also been holding monthly finance subcommittee meetings. We've talked about ARPA funding. We've talked about a number of different things. We've talked about the process for FY22, but we have also talked about the development of FY23 throughout, which has been helpful. And I have already shared this information with the town manager. I've shared this presentation, tonight with the town manager, but back on December 13th, I actually shared our initial findings of FY23, which was closer to the 3.6% increase, which was at that time $995,000. And we continued to look at enrollment and look to see where else we might be able to look at that, where we can, I think, lessen that difference. And that's where we eventually came to the 705,000 as well too. So that's kind of been our process so far. And that for the majority of you is actually just, again, a review. So I just throw that on there. So I think we can move forward, and we're going to get a little bit more specific into what then makes up the different aspects of the budget as well too, if you want to advance. So we have our revenue category. salaries, all right? So the town allocation is clearly the largest aspect of this, right? So it was the 62.2 in the previous budget. We're looking at a town allocation of 63, and I'm forgetting it off the top of my head, 63 and some change there. It's on the slide that we'll get to again, but I'm not remembering it at the top of my head. That's the lion's share of our revenue. The circuit breaker comes from, that's part of our special education reimbursement money that we'll talk about in a minute. We do have different grants that we have, and then there's just miscellaneous revenues as well too. But if you'll go to the next slide, Chris, that's going to break those down more specifically. So our circuit breaker revenue, this is reimbursed by the state. We use the prior year's it's based on the prior year's special education expenses, okay? We are budgeting for the FY23 amount, we're budgeting $2,084,797 to be used to offset our out-of-district tuition. That is from the FY22 special education expenses, okay? And we use it from the previous year and plan for it forward, as opposed to trying to guess what it will be and then banking on the future specifically. Is that the most accurate way to say that, Pat? Would you? No, you wouldn't. Thank you. Then please correct me. She shook her head politely. I'm like, no, please chime in.
So we're in the process of getting these monies based on FY21 expenditures. So you get them in FY22, but you get them in dribs and drabs throughout the year. You're allowed to spend it the following year.
Right. So I still am talking about the money that we're getting that we're planning to use in the future. I just didn't mention the correct year. Is that correct, Pat?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly right.
I need to know what I said incorrectly too, so that I don't make that mistake again. And then we have different federal and state grants, right? So one of the things that I think you'll all remember as well too is that the grant 240, the $820,000 that we have budgeted in FY23 that we also have in FY22. Previously, that was used for some of our special education salaries, and there was a very specific decision to move our salaries into our operation budget and out of this, so that then we would use this grant specifically for the tuition costs. And so that's what this is. And so you will see that happened this year, and we're planning to have that happen in FY23 as well. And then there are these miscellaneous revenues that we have that I think you, as a committee, you're all familiar with, because these are the revenues that we've talked about. So there has been ongoing expectation of using a certain amount of school choice every single year as part of our budget, and that's reflected there, the $312,585. Our athletics, activities, and music fees totaling $345,000, the bus parking fees, and you can read all those different aspects there too. The town cost sharing might be a point of confusion, but as a reminder, we have a few employees that we share with the town, and we pay a percentage of their salary, and the town pays a percentage as well too, and that's what that's reflecting. That's actually a combination of a few different positions that we share with the town, and different percentage distributions depending on that position as well too. And so then our expense categories, we're going to talk about them and break them down a little bit more so that you'll see what those look like. Again, we have we're specifically focusing on the salaries, the operation of facilities, our special education out of district tuition costs, and then our overall transportation costs. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see our salary breakdown. Again, this is something that you're well aware of, but the lion's share of our budget is our salary. So that is typical in most every public school in Massachusetts. And so our total, the grant total, is $52,813,079. And so when you look at the breakdown here, we've separated into categories. So we have our building and maintenance, building and ground staff, which includes maintenance and custodial, at $2 million. Our other, which actually includes all of our staff members who are not a part of a specific bargaining unit, right? So that's the district and building admin, the LPNs that we have who are not part of our Unit C bargained group of nurses. We have certified OT assistants, speech therapists, our entire IT department, our data manager, the athletic director, athletic trainer, we have a media tech at WA who has just a separate expectation and separate contract. And so all of those together total that line item right there. And then our secretarial staff is $1,162,408. Then all of our special education staff, which includes our teacher aides, our math and reading interventionists, as well as our academic coaches, that totals $3,947,999. And then our entire teaching staff, which is our classroom teachers, all of our nurses, our guidance counselors, our librarians, that's $40,552,612, all totaling there. Another thing that you're all aware of, but other people listening might not be aware of, but 10 out of our 11 collective bargaining agreements expire in June 2022. And so, so that's a whole aspect of trying to plan for FY23, which is challenging. Yes, Pat.
I just wanted to clarify one point of reference that I did add here, that these are the contractual salary expenses. This is actually still about another 300,000 short of what we spend on all salary monies, because substitutes are salary monies and stipends are salary monies. So I just wanted to point out that these are the contractual base salaries, and it's not comprehensive of all salaries, all salary money.
Thank you. Yes, that's important. Okay, let's go to the next slide, and then we can take questions after we've done the different breakdowns. So then we talk about operations and facilities. Those items are going to include our custodial services, the maintenance services, utility costs, and the upkeep of grounds. Now, as a reminder to everybody, we are responsible for 9 different schools. We also are responsible for central office, the treatment plants at Abbott, Stony Brook, Blanchard, Westford Academy, and then our Beacon Street maintenance facility, which is our maintenance garage, which is on Beacon Street. So those are the different buildings that play into just even beyond the schools as well too. What this budget does not reflect is one of the things that the school committee has talked about in the past, is trying to increase a level of support for preventative maintenance. And we are hoping to have more of that in future budgets. We're also very optimistic that if we're able to get a performance contract that Director of Facilities Paul Fox has been talking about, if we're able to secure something like that for a future, that's also going to have an impact to help us with overall with some of our costs in general, which would help us increase, I think, what we're doing for preventative maintenance. But right now, we are still primarily looking at responding to concerns more so than being as proactive as we think that we should be. And so when you look at the difference between the FY22 and the FY23 budget amount, it's just over $100,000 difference, which really isn't a significant amount if you're looking at trying to plan for preventative maintenance in all of our facilities as well. We can go ahead and move forward, Chris. Thank you. So then we talk about our special education and out of district tuitions. As a reminder, that's supported by the general fund. That is also supported by Circuit Breaker and the Grant 240, which we had talked about earlier. The different types of placements are listed here. So we have private day schools. We are projecting that we'll have 26 students in the FY23 budget who would be attending private day schools. We're projecting 10 students for private residential placements. Now, at times we have had students at programs at other public schools. We are not anticipating that for next year as we have in some of our previous years. We are a member of the Valley Collaborative, and we're projecting that 13 of our students will be outplaced there. And then we also have students who are placed at some non-member collaboratives, and we're anticipating 3 there. Those placements are all very specifically connected to the student's needs. And so we look to see how we can best support the student. And if there's one program that exists, then that might be, what our recommendation is. And sometimes we've found that the student requires just a different level of support, whether it's a day program, whether it's a full residential program, whether it's something at our Valley Collaborative, or whether it's something that's offered at a different collaborative. That's also the difference with the other public schools, is that there are some area public schools that offer a specific program that we might not offer, where we might be able to tuition a student to that program. We have actually taken students into some of our programs from other schools because we offered a specific program that would better support one of their students than they had. And so then they would then be sharing that cost and paying us to be supporting that student as well too. So then when you look at the overall projection, we're looking at 52 students we're projecting for FY23. And when you look at the difference here between FY22 and FY23, and you see the cost breakdown of what is in the general fund, and then what is supported by circuit breaker, and then what is supported by the IDEA grant, that shows how those numbers come together to be the 5 million in FY22 and the 5.3 million in FY23. Now let's go to the last slide, which is transportation, and then we can take questions for all the slides together. So now our transportation costs are a combination of both D transport and our special education transport, both that we have with our vans that we own here in the district, and then additional contracted service that we need for through D that's different than our general ed transport, but that goes beyond what we can support with just our vans. One of the things that I'd mentioned earlier, and we had talked about in terms of that the FY22 budget has $500,000 budgeted for this year. And we previously in the December 20th meeting, we talked about it being projecting at $300,000 over that. Well, the actual number is here, and the current projected expenditure for FY22 is $790,525. So that's an increase of $290,525. Now we are anticipating that level of expense is going to continue based on our projected student population and what we are seeing with the increase in transportation costs in the first place. One other additional thought here is the fact that we are in the third year of our contract with our general education transport, and so that we are eligible for rebid in FY23. And then we look at the kind of the breakdown of the costs there. You will see at the bottom there, the difference between FY22 and FY23 is not just the increase of the $290,525 that was not budgeted for this year. That's because there have been just additional things that we've looked at in looking at the difference between the FY22 budget and the FY23 budget that has just impacted that change. So it's actually less than that of an increase. Yes, Gloria.
Sorry, I'm full of questions. Have we had any update from the legislature on the possibility of circuit breaker reimbursement for special education transportation?
Go ahead, Pat.
Yes, so they sent me, I believe there was some education on the topic prior to my coming here, prior to my coming to Massachusetts. So they actually sent me some webinars for me to get myself up to speed. But yes, there is a way for us to calculate and include some of those costs in our circuit breaker calculations.
Any other questions about those, the breakdown of those slides? Well, if not, oh, go ahead, Catherine.
Just regarding the bus contract, looking for potentially rebidding for FY23, what's roughly the timeline on that process? I'm just curious about it in relation to working to the budget timeline.
So my goal is to have the bid, if we're going to bid and not exercise our ability to extend, which would have to be mutual. So if we're not going to exercise the ability to extend the base contract, which we can, then my goal is to be out on the street by the end of January. I'm speaking to peers, and that seems to be when everyone is pretty much going out for FY23.
there any other questions about those 4 slides? Great. So, Chris, if you want to go to the next slide. Well, what budget presentation would be complete without a pie chart? So we did want, as part of our budget summary, we did just want to show the overall percentages here, right? So when you look at our budget, 82.9% of our budget is salaries. And to Pat's point, that's higher than the 52 million that was on that slide, because that also includes the different stipends and the different things that she had mentioned as well too. So that's kind of our overall budget summary with a fun pie chart that shows the different aspects of the budget. And then if you'll go to the next slide, Chris, I did go back to the budget request overview. All right, so that again we can end here with this presentation specifically, reminding everybody that our budget request is the $64,187,590. That is currently a difference of $705,986 from the initial 2% town allocation of $63,481,604. I am in conversations with the town manager. We've already started those conversations as she's looking at different aspects of the town budget and different ways of just looking at, there's a number of different things, plenty of different things that that she's talked about where she believes that she can increase that town allocation, but we just don't know exactly by how much. So I know that the 705 is going to decrease. And when I feel more confident about what that final difference is, then I'm also going to be in a different position to then present to you what my recommendation would be to close that difference. But at this point, I feel like I wanted to focus on the request, how we got to the request, let everybody know that part of that request already includes a reduction of $517,000 from the FY22 budget in terms of staffing positions, which is why I also mentioned earlier when Ming Chen asked the question about the sections, is that implementing full day K would not change that budget request, because we already have part of that plan is the money that would be used in FY23 to support the additional sections that we would need, and then how we would move forward in FY24 and FY25 and FY26 to increase and carve out of our budget to build into the budget the overall costs of full day K over time. And the true challenge is that that $596,000 wasn't looked at in the same way at the time as the way we've been looking at the full day K. And so that's kind of the challenge. And then I'm going to look at what the difference is, and then we'll look to see, is there a way for us to roll that out over time? Depending on what the number is, there might be a way for us to show you a strategic way that we can wean ourselves off of that, as opposed to kicking the can and trying to use just X amount of school choice or another one-time use fund to just cover that basis. And that's the overall goal. And with that, I would say if there are any overall questions, or if Carrie or Pat, if there's anything that I did encourage them to interrupt me if I misspeak. And I think they were very kind in helping to support throughout this process. So if there's anything else or any other questions you have, please let us know.
Any questions? Okay, Alicia.
Sorry, I just wanted to circle back to the discussion about the bus contract potentially going out to bid. It's important for everyone who has not gone through this process to remember that historically, D has been our only bidder. That very often we'll get first student will pull and D will pull, but only D has ever returned a contract. While it might be nice to think about a savings that could be realized with a different bus contractor, we don't very often get other bus contractors who bid. So whether or not we go out to bid or whether or not we exercise our next 2 years, there may not actually be a huge cost savings difference in there.
Catherine, do you have a question?
I just want to follow up on Alicia. Is there a reason why or an explanation why we don't tend to get a number of potential bids or companies interested? Why does anybody not like them?
It's not that people don't like us. That's actually relatively common now, that districts don't get additional bus companies to bid. That in some ways, I will say it's become a little territorial in the fact that just this is somebody, the other people are like, they don't bid in other areas that are further from them. And it's sort of, it is not unique to Westford.
And if I may, it also is not cost effective for a large company that would service a city to try and service the suburbs in the same way. It just doesn't work out for them in their cost benefit analysis.
Other questions or comments? I'll just say, I mean, being on the finance subcommittee and having seen the process, so I just want to talk about the process a little bit, that I really appreciate how it's played out in the past few months. And I know, I mean, I know it's like squeezing water from a stone with this budget, but just the methodical process by which you all and your teams have taken this on. And I think the way the information has been presented, both at the last meeting on the 20th, where you know, it was sort of a preview of catching us up where we are, but then today really highlighting the key areas and making it easy to understand, but choosing the things that are important to understand about what are the main drivers in the budget. I found it really informative. And again, I know all the work that's gone into it and will continue to go into it in the coming weeks, but just a lot of gratitude so far where we're at. And I guess I would just say, what can we do as a committee to support the process, whether it's something you want to discuss tonight or ask about tonight, or whether it's just keeping the conversation going in the coming days, and then we'll be together again in 8 days. So I'm sure, even though that's not a lot of time, I'm sure the complexion will be different. I'm sure there will be changes. There'll be new information that we look forward to hearing. But again, just whatever, let us know what we can do as far as support or guidance going forward.
Thank you. I would definitely say that, we know that we're going to be deliberating it more, right? And so I've given you an opportunity to ask some questions tonight for clarification, but clearly you'll have more time to think about it. And you might have people ask you questions. I will say, I know one of the things that has been truly helpful in working and talking with the subcommittee, the finance subcommittee, has been important. And one of the many awesome ideas that Pat has brought, which I think has been fantastic, was she shared just the idea of in her previous life in another state, where there were budget buddies, right? So the idea that school committee members could kind of connect with members who were on the subcommittee, the finance subcommittee, to even ask different questions, to kind of have understanding of things, I think can be helpful. And I feel like when you have more time to think about it, we'll come back next week, and if there's something that it would be helpful for us to share more information about, let us know, and we can prepare that for next week as well. Because I don't anticipate learning this week specifically what that difference might be, because I think that would be way too soon to expect the town manager to have that information, knowing that she's preparing her budget for February 8th. I feel like one of the things we might talk about next week would be feedback that you've heard from people, questions that you've heard, and we might look at that timeline, right? Because I might have a better idea then as to when I might know, but we might want to officially let people know whether or not you would be voting on the 31st or not on something, and whether we would really be extending it. And if we're extending it because we're sort of waiting for more information, that's certainly very different than some of the long conversations that have existed in the past in trying to just understand some of the different necessary reductions or things like that. So I would say, if you're able to share comments, feedback that you get, if you can share some of those things ahead of time with us, then we can, prepare for that Monday. But at the same time, have questions on Monday that we can that we can sort of that we can respond to, and then I feel like we'll know next week even more so whether or not we're going to be voting in January or in February.
Great, that all makes sense. The budget buddies idea is great. I would say, I don't speak for Ming Chen and Valerie, but I'm available certainly to meet with anybody to talk about any questions that have come up regarding the budget. We just have to be careful about deliberation and things like that. But if it's informational, I think that could be helpful for folks. Valerie?
I was going to echo some of your comments, Chris, as a member of the finance subcommittee. The conversations that we've had there, I think, have been really helpful with seeing your presentation tonight as kind of an education of what the hard pressures are on our budget, right? Like the breakdown of things that are sort of non-negotiable, right? That just increase year over year, even more than the 2% that the big town allocation bucket increases by, right? Some of these pressures are growing by more than that. So I think that that's just a really great way to approach this and to be talking about it transparently in these public meetings to try and educate the community as we have those go along this process, I guess. So I just wanted to thank you for laying that all out. And, that's all.
Thank you.
And just to add on to, the presentation was a great reminder of what happened last year with the budget. And I think sometimes we want to put it behind us. We're like, oh, we did that last year, but it's so critical because it's so interrelated. And I found that particularly helpful to set the stage for where we're at now. And so that was great. Anyone else? Okay. The budget adventure continues, more to come.
There is a question from the audience.
We're not going to take public comment. We did public comment at the beginning, but hold that question, send it to the committee, please. We will make sure it gets incorporated into future discussions and considerations, and look for answers in the future. So please send those questions in. You can email the committee, and then or you can come to our meeting next Tuesday on the 18th, not Monday the 17th, Tuesday the 18th, and ask during public comment. Thank you. And with that, we are going to move on to our 8:50 agenda item, which is our COVID update.
Yes. So hold on one second. Let me get. So there was clearly, I mean, if you saw what was posted for our dashboard, there was a significant, when we came back, there was a significant increase, right? So I mean, the students and families in the schools are aware of the numbers that we had last week. Overall, we had I gotta look at the graph as well too to kind of remind people what the actual number was of actual total positive cases. Last week was 322, right? We had 80 school close contacts, which is actually amazingly not the highest number that we've had, because the majority of these positive cases were outside of school. Then, and then the idea of the in-school total close contacts, what we're looking at as well. So I think the numbers, I think people are aware of what the numbers are. Some important things for everybody to know is that DESE did announce today that the mask mandate is extending to February 28th. So it's going to be through the month of February. They released that information today. They have updated the protocols, and I'm going to make sure that our websites, both the health services website and then just even our website that has the links on it, have the most updated protocol information on it, because in looking at some of those links, some of the links were not, some of the links were the older protocols and some of the links were the newer protocols. So there was some confusion there. I do know that the nurses have been trying to communicate that information, and we can talk about that a little bit in a few minutes too, as people have questions. One of the things that I would like to talk about tonight is that I heard from a few parents who felt this way as well too. I do feel like we've gotten to a point where sending out the letters, the initial intent of sending out the letters from the schools to provide transparency and to let people know when things were happening, I think that made a lot of sense early on. I think now the numbers have got to a point where it doesn't make sense to keep sending the letters. What we really should be doing is just pointing people to the dashboard so that they can see the counts, so they can see that more specifically than it got to where there were just daily letters going out every single day. And I was hearing more from parents that was not necessarily helpful. And so while I think that the original intent even last year that when we started doing that was for transparency to let people know that we were aware of the cases, I feel like it's not helping parents in the way that I think we need to. So that's something that I think, I'll share with you that we can talk about. If you have a different opinion, please let me know. But that would be my recommendation, that we don't continue with the daily letter notification from each school, but we point families to the dashboard, which is being updated. Now, we might decide to update the dashboard more than just weekly. That might be something that we can do. Right now, it's a tremendous amount that's falling on one person's shoulders that I don't necessarily want to ask that one person to do. So I want to see if I can provide some additional support to the person who's been updating the actual that actual information that gets posted to the website. So I want to there are people who post it, but then there's a person who's actually creating all of that, and I want to see make sure that I can provide the support necessary to do that. Our overall test and stay numbers, I had asked for that. To date, we've done 750 test and stay tests, and we've now had 7 positive cases. So before that, in my December 20th report, I think we had 4, and now we've had 7, and so that's still significantly a lower number, but it's it's a concern that it's increased. The nurses are still telling me that they're not seeing increased in-school transmission, because the majority of these cases that we're learning about are still, they learned about a lot of them on January 3rd and January 4th. A lot of these cases didn't come into the school. As people are aware that the attendance rate has been super high. That number went down today to a high number that was before December. It's still not the number that we're used to seeing, but it wasn't the 383 that we saw one day last week. One of the things that I think we've been talking about, people have been asking questions about the pool testing and whether it'd make more sense to be moving towards pool testing at this moment in time. And I will say, we are exploring that. We are looking at that in ways that we didn't look at that before, because ideally, as more and more people are vaccinated and as more and more people weren't eligible for the test and stay program, we would be able to kind of shift some of our resources to then look at more proactive measures as well too. The challenge is that CIC Health, who has been supporting the districts who have been doing pooled testing, they've been telling everybody that there's a significant decrease in the supplies that are available for schools who are doing that, and the testing time in general has increased tremendously. So someone who might have had a closer turnaround it might be an additional 48 hours to what it was beforehand before they would get the results of those initial pool tests, which isn't necessarily helping right now. And they have a staffing shortage as well, staffing shortage as well, which would not help us increase. But we have had support from CIC for our test and stay program. So as the need for test and stay decreases, we might be able to shift that. So we are looking at that. That's not something that we're going to look at in the next couple of weeks, because it just doesn't make sense, because the supplies aren't there and the additional staffing isn't there, and the turnaround of testing isn't there that is necessarily going to help you. About just under 50% of our families have provided consent. Now, that doesn't need to be 100%, because a number of our students are vaccinated. So families that didn't think that they would have been eligible to participate in test and stay in the first place might not have sent in the consent as well too. So it might be a more accurate reflection of the people who would be eligible for pool testing and eligible for test and stay. So we might look at that. But when we first started talking about it, the numbers weren't such that it would be a more random check of students, that it didn't seem to, I think, to provide that proactive measure that I think people thought it would be. So we're looking at it. We weren't looking at it before. We are going to look at it now, but right now we're not going to be instituting it. So people have been asking that question, just because even with this specific time period that we're looking at with these numbers, the support isn't there for us to institute it, but we are looking at that. So if people are asking. Another thing to update people is that DESE is looking at contact tracing in general, because that has become just absolutely overwhelming across the state for schools in general. So they've been looking at the practicality of that, and they might make some adjustments in that in general. We're looking to see how we can still do this in as manageable a way as possible. And it's just becoming increasingly difficult there. What we haven't had that other districts have had is we have not had the impact on our staffing in the way that other districts have. So we have been able to keep schools open. And so I know people have asked the question as to why you're keeping schools open. Well, I'll share for people who've been asking questions about whether remote would be an opportunity. Last week, we had a meeting with the Commissioner of Education, and that meeting started with a presentation that he had brought to us from a doctor from Harvard Medical School, who was sharing with all of the superintendents in the state why it's critical for schools to stay open at this time because of the impact that closing schools has on the healthcare system. Because people were saying that closing schools would help release the strain and pressure on the healthcare system, and they were saying it would do the exact opposite. So this meeting with the school, with the Commissioner of Education, started with him basically telling us why we're not going to be closing schools and having remote options for everybody for an extended period of time. He did tell us that, we can use snow days for that purposes. And if we're having staffing issues, we could do that, and kind of encouraged us all to use our first 5 snow days first. And then after we've used all 5 snow days, if he then might start looking at whether remote learning might be a way to make up for a day, because they had taken blizzard bags off the table. They had taken that really off the table last year, but it was something that they're talking about right now. So that's sort of the update in general. Carrie, did I miss anything there that you can think of?
No, you covered everything.
So I don't know if I imagine there might be questions, just because I think you're getting questions as well too. So if I didn't answer any of those questions, please let me know. Catherine.
Just coming back to that contact tracing, because I imagine our nursing staff are pretty overwhelmed with the numbers we're getting right now. Have we the ability to adapt or change that process now within the district without waiting on guidance per se from DESE? And I kind of bring that, looking at that through the lens of now that all our kind of K through 12 are eligible for vaccinations, can that change in any way? Just, I'm assuming our nurses are massively snowed under the last, 2 weeks with returning to school and the numbers we're getting.
I think there are some things that we can do internally. One of the things that we've talked about was just I think the expectation with the different age levels, right? And so since the academy specifically has a much higher number of vaccinated students, they also have a higher, number of cases at times, and just of absences in general. That in the past, what I think we've been trying to do, haven't always been able to do it successfully, but what we've been trying to do is make sure that the nurses were also while they're talking with the student, they're also communicating with the teachers to try to understand, okay, who else in that classroom might be identified as a close contact. And so rather than trying to contact 7 potential teachers, they're focusing more on just talking with the student directly to find out if the student can share the different people that they've been in close and sat around in different classes. And that's one way that's kind of tried to minimize that, whereas the elementary schools specifically are primarily talking with one teacher, and it might be an easier thing for them to talk about, just like the elementary students might not also be as able to share exactly the different people that they were in contact with and who they might be working with. So it's kind of a combination of those things. So I think one of the things is the number of phone calls to the different classes we might be able to decrease at one level, but we can't necessarily do that at another level. But then we might be able to help share some of those resources then. So that's a way that we're kind of looking at that. But that's still that we're still trying to see what is manageable. I don't know. Does that help, Catherine?
Yeah, no, I mean, I suppose anything to reduce the numbers of, of calls that these nurses are having to make, I think is going to be a good thing, and if it can be done. Are we doing then anything regarding lunches then, or when I'm just thinking of the unmasked time then, are we ensuring there's 3 feet between each student or whatever, again, just to try and reduce the amount of close contacts within schools?
Well, many of our schools had already increased the distance as much as they could so that close contacts during lunch was not a factor, because they wouldn't have been within that in the first place. But not all of our buildings could do that in the same way. And so we are still looking to see if we need to move towards additional lunch spaces, alternative lunch spaces. Like, I think the Academy is a good example where they had got to where they were allowing 6 students at a table. They've gone back to 4 students at a table, and then just increased spaces where students could be eating, where that had kind of decreased. And I feel like we have to look and see where there might still be some alternative spaces. I know some of the schools have been able to proactively do that easier than others. Alicia?
So unfortunately, my question actually involves more work. I know that a lot of the principals have started asking parents who their child may not have necessarily have gone for the PCR test, but took the home test and got a positive, that they're asking to have them report. And I'm seeing some question about how do we know the difference in the numbers? And frankly, we don't, because unless it comes through the state, we don't know. So if someone is taking a home test and not following up with a PCR, we're not finding out about that number. If I could just put a plug out there for anyone who does take that route, if they could, and could you confirm for me, is it report it to the Department of Health in town? Because otherwise that doesn't get into our system, and then those people are not being contact traced.
I will say at this point, Alicia, the nurses are reporting what they are being told. So our numbers currently do include people who have used antigen rapid tests at home, and they've told that, whereas DESE wasn't allowing us to use that. That was also a change. DESE said that over the break, that they didn't have to just rely on the MAVEN results, the PCR results. So the numbers that we're seeing are reflective of, it is still self-reported, right? So it's still that piece of it, right? And it's people who have been able to take an at-home test and or a PCR test, and that they've reported that and they have called and told. So that's been a difference here, is that the numbers that specifically right at the beginning of last week, those numbers were parents calling and telling the school that my child's not coming in because they tested positive, right? Or my child's not coming in because they were told that they were a close contact. That was the nurses in many ways responding to those messages and those calls, answering questions for people, in addition to then counting and trying to figure things out and following up, because there were some cases it was coming through MAVEN, in some cases it wasn't. So that has already started to happen, but your point is still, I think, important, that, if people can share that information, the more people are willing to share, the more helpful that is. It is, sometimes people were very quick to not share that before, and I understood that, because there was, different people had different feelings about what was happening. And so, but I think now people are much more apt to just clearly tell people if they've received a positive test from at home.
That's really good to know. And thank you to everyone who is doing that. And please continue to do that, because I think that will assuage a lot of the concerns that parents are having about underreporting of numbers. So thank you.
And just to follow up, do we feel like we have a sense of the most concise way to report that? I don't want to create additional work. So whether it's through the health department or through school nurses, do we have a sense of like, what would you recommend a family do if they have a positive home test case?
I do believe calling in and reporting that on the absent line is still the most, I feel like that's what people have been doing. And it makes for a lot of, or an email would also help that process, right? But I do feel like we want to get that information in, because when people were sharing why they were out, it's when people aren't saying why they're out, that becomes a problem. So the more specific, or the more willing people can share why someone is not in the building, then the more the nurses will know, and then they can account for that, as opposed to if somebody doesn't say why the student is out, then there's going to be a follow-up, right? And so then someone's going to look into that to find out why wasn't the person in school. And we kind of need to know these things so that we can figure out if there needs to be additional information, or if we need to contact additional people.
Right. I also wanted to say, thinking of just things that are concise and helpful, that the guidance, I think it's the updated DESI COVID protocols. I found that was nice. That's a one-page concise way of understanding what do I do from positive case, close contact. I think that's as succinct as I've seen it.
And that is now updated. That was updated today. It wasn't that one link on the district website. It was updated in the nurses section, but there was some access issues that some people were having. So we've put that as the updated protocols. And today, actually this afternoon, DESI sent out a new flow chart that follows the new protocols that we will upload tomorrow, so that the flow chart will also be the new one. Right now, it's the old flow chart, but the new DESI guidance, which we'll talk about again. As a reminder to people, the change was that if someone tests positive and after 5 days, their symptoms, they've either been asymptomatic the 5 days, or if they had symptoms and after 5 days, their symptoms have decreased and they've been fever-free without medication for more than 24 hours, then they could return to school on the 6th day. They need to wear a mask. They need to be wearing, now we're wearing masks anyway. That's still part of our requirement. The difference here is that they're expected to wear masks outside. They're expected to wear masks on the playground. They would still be expecting to wear masks outside of school. We would be expecting them to still be staying masked, with the exception of when they're eating. And I know that that's a concern that people have had, that people would be taking off their masks to eat. And so we're trying to make sure that that's addressed everywhere as well too, consistently. But I know that that was a concern that some people had. And there was, I did have one parent reach out to me because they were concerned that when I had sent that out, even in my January update, I didn't specifically say that the symptoms needed to decrease. I was talking about just what DESI had been saying. And so they had changed that isolation had gone from 10 days to 5 days. It was with the caveat of either being asymptomatic or a decrease in symptoms, as opposed to somebody who is still showing full symptoms or the symptoms are increasing. No, you wouldn't be ending isolation. That just doesn't make sense.
Okay, any other?
Valerie has a question. Go ahead, Valerie.
Go ahead, Valerie.
It just seems timely that we're experiencing those freezing temps this week in this uptick. And I've seen some concern about the windows open, guideline. And I guess I was curious if there's any, there's probably no easy answer, but if there's any creative solutions with regards to that we could potentially be using some of those COVID funds for, or just anything else that has come up with regards to this uptick.
So I was talking with Paul Fox even more about that, right? And so the idea of the concerns in the classrooms. And so I had somebody reach out to me because, again, when I had suggested, being prepared that we would try to keep the windows cracked throughout the winter, I think there has been some misunderstandings and even just some confusion. I will say, from my experience as a building principal last year through this, we did not going through the entire winter, we did not have rooms that were not habitable. We did not have rooms that students could not be in while we still continued to have windows cracked and students were going outside every single day. They continued to go outside every single day and continued to, sometimes they kept their coats with them because they couldn't use their lockers, specifically at the middle school and at the academy as well too. So yeah, some students might have kept their coats on, some students might have taken them off. I think there's a little bit of confusion when we're still working to make sure that the learning environment is as optimal as possible. We're also talking about keeping the windows cracked because there is a genuine concern that some families have expressed about continuing to have fresh air circulating through our buildings, which I think makes a lot of sense. But the filtration that we have in place, the filters that we have put in our buildings are circulating the air and filtering it appropriately based on the resources that we purchased last year. And so Paul Fox is also still confident that the air exchange is such that if we were to close, if the rooms were to get too cold tomorrow and the windows did get closed, the air circulation even throughout the systems that we have, not to mention just the air filtration that we do have in many of our rooms already, it's still going to be quite effective. But I feel like we can still keep the windows cracked and still have a temperature that is manageable within the classroom. There might be some that are colder than others, and the principals are prepared to work with those teachers to help move students. I mean, we do have some of our rooms. I mean, I will say, like, in the cold weather at any time, our gyms stay cold, right? Because they're just so large. The larger auditoriums, if there's a class in there, they tend to stay cold because the heat has risen in different ways than many of our classrooms, right? But we are being mindful of it, and the principals are aware of the challenging spaces that exist in all of the different buildings, knowing that they could temporarily move a classroom just like they do if it gets too hot as well too. I feel like there are things that they can do, and the principals know that they're empowered to do that on a daily basis. And so if they're looking at that tomorrow, and if the teachers are concerned about a classroom specifically, I feel like they can work proactively to do that. I don't know if that helps Valerie specifically to that question or not, but I do know that that's just ways in which I think on a regular basis they're trying to best mitigate, I think, drastic temperature fluctuations versus, I think, a more steady change.
Right. Any other COVID-related questions from the committee?
Catherine.
Sorry, just one last thing that popped into my head. I'm just curious, I know we spoke about, we're currently doing tests today and pool testing, considering the numbers, have we looked at even doing an option of symptomatic testing? So I'm just wondering, if a kid is in school and develops a fever as the day goes on or something, that being able to go to the nurse and do a test there and then in the moment for the nurse, or the nurse having that tool if they feel they need it. Has that been discussed at all? Because I'm just wondering, would that help, particularly knowing how tricky it is at the moment to get other tests as well, that for a nurse in terms of contact tracing, at least they're potentially not wasting a day or two while waiting on tests for a kid where they might have that information, within a 15-20 minute window.
We have continued talking about it, right? So we did talk about it earlier, and there were concerns, very specific concerns earlier about whether or not it would end up being a similar concern now, whether it could end up becoming a catch-22, where then we end up having people who are sending students into school who really shouldn't be sending their students into school because they're not able to have access to a test, which is not good, right? And that's kind of one of the things that we're still kind of looking at as we're looking at the increased numbers and or the challenge with contact tracing. That might become something that would make the process easier, especially as we are in what we saw even in December was different, right? So what we saw in December with just this amazingly high number of students who are out because of the flu and not because of COVID, that could be something that would change in the next couple of weeks. So we might say that would be a better way to do that, where it wasn't previously. So we are talking about it. It's not a recommendation that I'm making tonight, but it's something that we'll continue to talk about. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that conversation. Everyone just keep staying safe. Be smart, wear your masks. I mean, it's definitely just so inflamed and peaking right now with the Omicron variant. And I guess the hope that I'm sure you all share with me is that it burns out as fast as it has heated up. And I think maybe there's some early indications of that. So with any luck, things will look very different 2, 3, 4 weeks from now. I think that's the hope. But stay safe and appreciate the good questions and descriptions here. And with that, we are going to move on to personnel update, which is in your packet, everybody. Any comments, Dr. Chu, on that?
I will actually. There's two things that I think I'd like to highlight. It was something that many people were aware of, but it hadn't actually been in a previous packet because I just think the final paperwork might not have been done. I'm not exactly sure why, but there was just a reason that we have a retirement that's in the packet that talking about what we were just talking about, I think is kind of important to highlight. And I like to highlight the retirements when I can. And there's actually someone rescinded their retirement. So I kind of want to talk about those two things, right? So first I'll just talk about John Copley, who's over at Blanchard. He had actually put in his intent to retire and then has actually been able, had some time off and then saw sort of the demands, I think, on the school. And I know the Blanchard community is really grateful that he then, requested to rescind his retirement because he actually wants to be able to continue to kind of help while we're at right now and provide some more time. So he's actually rescinded his retirement. And Sue Hanley, the nurse over at Stony Brook, who I worked with for 7 years, and she had actually told us last spring that this was going to be her last year. So many people kind of knew that, but tonight I'm sharing with you that it's officially in the packet that she's announced her retirement, and this will be her last year. And we certainly wish her well and are thankful for the contribution that she's had to the district. And there'll be more of that as the year continues. But I just wanted to highlight those two things because it was something that many people were aware of, but just officially I don't think had been in a packet. And then the other one being that somebody who we did talk about, who said, and we had actually, congratulated John on his retirement, has actually decided to rescind it. And the Blanchard, I know the administration and community was actually very grateful that he had done that because he's able to help them right now in this predicament.
Yeah, well, I know what an asset he is to that school, so I'm sure they definitely appreciate having him around a little longer. And Sue, same thing. I mean, not just what she does at Stony Brook, but what she does in the community, whether it be with mental health or what she's done with COVID in the past 2 years. It's been really impressive, and everybody's grateful. So best to her. And yeah, like you said, I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the coming months. So thanks for that update. And that brings us to nothing else on the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, motion to adjourn. All in favor? Valerie?
Aye.
Ming Chen,
Aye.
Gloria,
Aye.
Catherine,
Aye.
Sean,
Aye.
Alicia.
Aye.
I'm an aye, and that means we are adjourned at 9:14. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. And see, we're back in the Zoom saddle. Let's hopefully we won't be back in the saddle for long. So have a good night, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.